The melody floated through the crisp autumn air, gentle and soothing as it mingled with the rustling leaves of Madison Square Park. Melody Parker didn't have much, but her voice was a gift she could always give her 6-month-old daughter, Zoe. Sitting on a weathered wooden bench, she cradled her bundle of joy, singing a tender lullaby her grandmother had taught her years ago. The song wasn't anything special, a simple tune about dreams and stars. But when Melody sang it, the world seemed to pause and listen. "That's my little sunshine," she whispered, as Zoe's eyelids grew heavy. Being a single mother at 26 wasn't what Melody had planned. The past year had been a whirlwind of heartbreak and joy, her fiancé walking out when she was 7 months pregnant, the grueling hours working as a barista while finishing her teaching degree online, and then the indescribable moment when she first held Zoe in her arms. Life was harder than she'd ever imagined, but also infinitely more beautiful. 30 yards away, partially hidden by a massive oak tree, Thomas Harrington sat alone on another bench. At 42, he was at the pinnacle of his career, CEO of Harrington Investments, a financial empire he'd built from scratch. His charcoal suit, worth more than what most people earned in a month, was impeccably tailored. His Italian leather shoes gleamed in the afternoon sun. From the outside, he embodied success, yet his eyes, a deep shade of grey that matched the gathering clouds above, told a different story. Thomas had come to the park seeking escape. The board meeting that morning had been particularly brutal, another record-breaking quarter, another expansion opportunity, another reason to celebrate his Midas touch. But in the quiet moments between handshakes and congratulations, the emptiness threatened to swallow him whole. 20 years of 16-hour days had earned him everything and nothing at all. The first few notes of the woman's song had barely registered in his consciousness. But there was something in her voice, a raw authenticity that cut through his carefully constructed walls. Thomas found himself closing the email he'd been drafting on his phone, his attention drawn to the young mother and her child. Melody didn't notice the man watching her. She was lost in her own world, singing about moonbeams and wishes, her fingers gently stroking Zoe's soft cheek. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow around them, creating a halo effect that made the scene look almost ethereal. "We don't need much, do we, little one?" she murmured between verses. "Just you and me against the world." Thomas felt a lump forming in his throat. The woman's voice wasn't professionally trained. It occasionally wavered on higher notes, but it carried an emotional weight that no recording studio could capture. It reminded him of his mother, who had raised him alone after his father abandoned them when Thomas was 5. She had worked 3 jobs, but always found time to sing to him before bed. Those memories had been buried under decades of ambition and achievement. A business call interrupted the moment, forcing Thomas to tear his eyes away from the scene. His assistant's voice on the other end was tense with urgency. "Mr. Harrington, the Tokyo deal is falling apart. Nakamura is threatening to walk if we don't agree to their terms by morning." Thomas pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell Jenkins to prepare the revised proposal. I'll be in the office in 20 minutes. He ended the call, his momentary peace shattered. When he looked up again, the woman was packing her things. The baby had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Tiny fingers curled around a strand of her mother's auburn hair. Thomas watched as she carefully placed the child in a well-worn stroller, tucking a handmade blanket around the sleeping infant. Melody glanced at her watch and sighed. Her shift at the coffee corner started in an hour, and she still needed to drop Zoe off at her neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired kindergarten teacher, watched Zoe for a fraction of what daycare would cost, a blessing Melody thanked the universe for daily. As she pushed the stroller toward the park exit, a gust of wind caught the blanket, lifting it from the stroller. Melody lunged to catch it, but the movement jostled her bag, sending its contents spilling across the pathway. Her wallet, a textbook, a half-eaten sandwich, and a stack of past-due notices that she'd been avoiding all week. Thomas saw it happen. Without thinking, he rushed forward, catching the blanket just before it touched the ground. Their eyes met as he handed it back to her. "Thank you," Melody said, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks as she quickly gathered her scattered belongings. "Let me help," Thomas offered, kneeling to retrieve a library book that had slid under the bench. "It's fine, really," Melody began, but stopped when she saw what Thomas was looking at. The book had fallen open to a page where she'd been taking notes for her teaching certification exam. Dreams, scribbled in the margins. classroom of my own by next year. Safe neighborhood for Zoe. No more night shifts. Thomas closed the book and handed it to her, suddenly conscious of having glimpsed something intensely private. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and he was struck by the calluses on her hands, evidence of work far removed from the manicured executives he dealt with daily. "Thank you," she repeated, tucking the book away. "We should get going." "Of course," Thomas nodded, stepping back. "You have a beautiful voice." Melody's expression softened with surprise. "You heard me singing." "Hard not to," he said, offering a tentative smile. "It was nice." "Well, it's free entertainment, and those are the best kinds when you're on a budget," she replied with a self-deprecating laugh. "Say goodbye, Zoe." The baby remained fast asleep, oblivious to the exchange. As Melody walked away, pushing the stroller with one hand and adjusting her bag with the other, Thomas remained rooted to the spot. Something in his chest felt tight, uncomfortable. The board meeting minutes ago seemed like another lifetime, another person's concerns. He watched until she disappeared around the corner, then slowly turned back toward his original destination, the office, the deal, the empire that suddenly felt hollow. What Thomas didn't know, as he walked away in the opposite direction, was that the past due notice at the top of Melody's stack was an eviction warning. In 72 hours, she and Zoe would have nowhere to call home. And what Melody couldn't have guessed was that the well-dressed stranger who'd helped her had just made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Thomas couldn't focus on the Tokyo deal. The numbers on his screen blurred as his mind kept drifting back to the young mother in the park. There had been something in her eyes, a determined resilience mixed with exhaustion, that haunted him. After his third attempt to read the same paragraph, he pushed away from his desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. 40 stories below, Manhattan glittered in the early evening light, a testament to ambition and possibility. "Mr. Harrington?" His assistant, Patricia, appeared at the door. "The board is waiting in the conference room." Thomas nodded, straightening his tie. "I'll be right there." As he strode down the hallway, he found himself wondering what the young woman from the park was doing now. Feeding her baby? Working a late shift? Worrying about those bills he'd glimpsed? Thomas! Richard Blackwood, the company's CFO and Thomas's oldest friend, clapped him on the shoulder as he entered the conference room. "We were starting to think you'd abandoned us for greener pastures. Just finalizing some thoughts," Thomas replied, sliding into his chair at the head of the table. 8 expectant faces turned toward him, each representing billions in investment capital and decades of cutthroat business experience. The meeting progressed with its usual efficiency. Updates were given, strategies discussed, decisions made. Thomas participated automatically, his outward performance flawless. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. When the discussion turned to cutting costs by outsourcing their customer service department, eliminating 300 local jobs, Thomas found himself asking questions he'd never considered before. What's the human cost of this decision? How many of those employees are supporting families? Richard stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "Since when do we factor human cost into our quarterly projections? The numbers speak for themselves, Thomas." "It's an extra 18 million in annual savings." "Right," Thomas conceded, feeling oddly disconnected from the conversation. "Of course." After the meeting, Richard cornered him by the elevator. "What was that about? You've never questioned efficiency measures before." Thomas shrugged. "Just being thorough. This isn't about Kate, is it? Your divorce was finalized months ago." "No," Thomas said quickly. His 3-year marriage to Catherine Winters, socialite, philanthropist and strategic alliance according to the business press, had ended with clinical precision, much like it had begun. There had been no messy emotions, no bitter arguments over possessions, just 2 people who realized they'd made a calculated error and were cutting their losses. Nothing to do with Kate. Richard studied him for a moment longer. "Good. Because you've got the Myers presentation tomorrow and they're expecting the Thomas Harrington they've read about in Forbes. Ruthless, brilliant, uncompromising. They'll get exactly what they paid for," Thomas assured him, stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed, he felt a weight settling onto his shoulders. The penthouse apartment waiting for him held no warmth, no life. Just expensive furniture and panoramic views that had long since lost their power to impress him. Across town, Melody's feet ached as she cleared another table at the coffee corner. The evening rush had finally eased, leaving only a few customers lingering over laptops and lattes. Her throat was raw from talking over the espresso machine all evening, but she couldn't afford to take a break. Tips had been miserable, and the eviction notice burning a hole in her bag gave her no room for anything less than maximum effort. "So you look dead on your feet," Jack, her manager, commented as she loaded the dishwasher. At 54, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, he'd been more understanding than most about her situation. "I'm fine," Melody insisted, forcing a smile. "Just didn't sleep well last night, Zoe's teething." Jack frowned. "Those circles under your eyes tell a different story. Something else is going on." Melody hesitated. Pride had always been her downfall, but desperation was a powerful motivator. "I got an eviction notice yesterday. If I don't come up with 3 months of back rent by Friday, Zoe and I are out." "Jesus, Mel, how much are we talking about?" $3,400, she said. The figure seared into her brain. "I've got about 800 saved. My student loan payment cleared out most of my account last week." Jack's expression was sympathetic but helpless. "I wish I could help, but with Denise's medical bills—" "I know," Melody said quickly. Jack's wife had been battling cancer for over a year. "I wasn't asking. I'll figure something out." She grabbed a rag and moved to wipe down the counters, effectively ending the conversation. As she cleaned, Melody mentally reviewed her options. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. There were no relatives to call for help. Her former friends from college had drifted away during her pregnancy, uncomfortable with her new reality as a single mother. The father of her child had made it abundantly clear he wanted no part in their lives. She had exactly 4 days to perform a financial miracle. The bell above the door jingled, and Melody looked up automatically. Her heart stuttered for a moment. The man from the park, the one who had caught Zoe's blanket, was standing in the entrance, scanning the cafe. He looked different in the artificial light, more imposing, more polished. His suit probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. For a wild moment, she thought he might have followed her, but that was ridiculous. This was New York. Coincidences happened all the time. Still, when his eyes landed on her, there was a flash of recognition that made her stomach flip unexpectedly. Thomas hadn't planned to stop for coffee. The decision had been impulsive, a detour on his walk home. Something had drawn him to this neighborhood, though he rarely ventured this far from his usual haunts. When he spotted the young woman from the park behind the counter, he almost turned around and left. But she had already seen him, and retreating now would seem strange. "What can I get you?" Melody asked as he approached the counter, her customer service voice firmly in place. "Just a black coffee," Thomas replied, studying her name tag. Melody. It suited her. As she poured his drink, he noticed how her hands trembled slightly. The cafe was nearly empty, and the silence between them felt charged with unspoken words. "How's your daughter?" he asked finally, accepting the cup she offered. Surprise flickered across her features. "She's good, with a neighbor. Thanks for asking." "That'll be $3, she added professionally. Thomas handed her a 20. "Keep the change." Melody stiffened. "That's a $17 tip. I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I don't take charity," she said quietly, already counting out his change. Thomas recognized the pride in her stance. It was familiar, the same stubborn self-reliance he'd developed growing up poor in Boston's roughest neighborhood. Before he could respond, his phone rang. The screen showed his lawyer's name. "I need to take this," he said, accepting the change she was determinedly holding out. "Thank you for the coffee." Stepping outside, he answered the call. "David, what's up?" "The foundation paperwork is ready for your signature," his lawyer informed him. "Are you still planning to allocate the full $50 million? The Thomas Harrington Foundation had been his pet project for months, a tax-efficient way to distribute some of his wealth while enhancing his corporate image. The funds would go to various carefully selected charities, generating maximum PR value for the company. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, but his eyes drifted back to the cafe window where Melody was wiping down tables with methodical precision. "Actually, David, I've been thinking, what if we allocated part of the foundation's resources to more direct assistance, individual cases rather than just organizations?" "That's not generally how foundations operate," David cautioned. "It's administratively complex and opens you up to endless requests. But it's possible? Technically, yes. With the right structure and clear criteria." David paused. What's prompted this? Thomas watched as Melody dropped something, a piece of paper that fluttered to the floor. Even from outside, he could see that it was the eviction notice from earlier. She quickly snatched it up, her expression a mixture of frustration and fear. "I just think we could make a more immediate impact in some cases," Thomas said carefully. After ending the call, Thomas remained outside the cafe, conflicted. The woman inside clearly needed help, but was too proud to accept it. He recognized that pride because he'd lived it. His own mother had worked herself to exhaustion rather than accept handouts, a trait he'd both admired and resented as a child watching her deteriorate. What Thomas didn't know yet was that his brief encounter with Melody and her baby was awakening something he'd buried long ago, a connection to his own humanity that success had gradually eroded. And what Melody couldn't have anticipated was that the well-dressed stranger would soon present both her greatest hope and her most difficult choice. As the cafe lights dimmed for closing, their separate worlds seemed galaxies apart. Yet, an invisible thread had been spun between them, one that would pull them back together in ways neither could imagine. Melody woke before her alarm, her mind racing with calculations and possibilities. 2 days until eviction. She'd spent the previous night calling every assistance program in the city, only to be told the same thing. Waiting lists were months long, emergency funds depleted. Her last hope was her final paycheck from the coffee corner due tomorrow. It wouldn't be enough, but it was something. The sound of Zoe babbling in her crib pulled Melody from her thoughts. Despite everything, her daughter's morning smile never failed to lift her spirits. "Good morning, sunshine," Melody whispered, lifting the baby into her arms. "Ready for another adventure?" Zoe responded with a toothless grin, unaware of the storm clouds gathering around their tiny world. As Melody fed and dressed her daughter, she made a decision. Today she would swallow her pride and ask Jack for an advance on next week's wages. It wasn't a solution, but it might buy her some time to figure out a more permanent answer. Across town, Thomas sat in his home office, staring at the foundation documents. He'd been up since 5, researching rental assistance programs and emergency housing funds in the city. What he discovered was discouraging. Massive demand, limited resources, and bureaucratic roadblocks at every turn. The system seemed designed to fail those who needed it most. "Mr. Harrington," his housekeeper announced from the doorway, "your car is ready." Thomas nodded absently, gathering his briefcase. The Myers presentation was in 2 hours, a potential billion-dollar deal that would cement his company's position at the top of the industry. Yet as his driver navigated through morning traffic, Thomas found himself pulling up the Coffee Corner's website on his phone, checking their hours. The presentation went flawlessly. Thomas dazzled the Myers executives with projections and promises, his reputation for excellence on full display. When the handshakes were done and the contracts tentatively agreed upon, Richard clapped him on the back. "That's the Thomas I know. The board will be ecstatic. Schedule the follow-up for next week," Thomas instructed his assistant as they left the meeting. "And clear my schedule for the afternoon. I have some foundation business to attend to." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you handle foundation matters personally? That's what we pay the PR team for." "Since now," Thomas replied, his tone ending further discussion. An hour later, Thomas found himself back at the Coffee Corner. The cafe was busier than the previous evening, with a lunch crowd filling most tables. Melody was behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, efficiently managing the line of customers. She looked even more tired than yesterday, the circles under her eyes darker. Thomas joined the queue, watching as she maintained a warm smile for each customer despite her obvious exhaustion. When he reached the counter, recognition flickered in her eyes. "Black coffee again?" she asked, already reaching for a cup. "Actually," Thomas said, lowering his voice, "I was hoping to speak with you. When is your break?" Melody's guard visibly went up. "I don't take breaks during rush hour, and I don't mean to be rude, but I don't generally chat with customers outside of work." "It's about a potential opportunity," Thomas said, aware of how suspicious that must sound. "A legitimate one," he added hastily, "through my foundation." Confusion crossed her face. "Foundation?" "The Harrington Foundation," he clarified, handing her his business card. "Thomas Harrington. I realize we haven't been properly introduced." Melody glanced at the card, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized the name. Thomas Harrington was a fixture in business news. the self-made billionaire whose investment strategies had revolutionized the industry. What could someone like him possibly want with her? "I get off at 3, she said finally, the line of customers behind Thomas growing impatient. "But I have to pick up my daughter immediately after." 3 it is, Thomas confirmed, stepping aside to let the next customer order. He spent the intervening hours at a nearby cafe, working remotely and finalizing his proposal. At precisely 3 o'clock, he returned to find Melody waiting outside, her uniform replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. "I only have 30 minutes before I need to get Zoe," she said without preamble. "Let's walk," Thomas suggested, indicating the direction of the park where they'd first met. As they made their way through the busy streets, Thomas explained the Harrington Foundation's mission: to identify and support individuals with demonstrated potential who were facing extraordinary circumstances. What he didn't mention was that he'd created this particular initiative the night before specifically with her in mind. The foundation provides housing assistance, educational funding, and career development support, he explained. In exchange, recipients agree to pay it forward once they're established, mentoring others or contributing to the foundation's work. Melody listened with increasing skepticism. "And you're telling me about this because you're exactly the kind of person the program was designed for," Thomas said carefully. "A single parent, pursuing education, working multiple jobs, demonstrating determination and resilience." Melody stopped walking. "How do you know all that about me?" Thomas hesitated. The truth that something about her had affected him so deeply that he'd spent hours researching assistance options and restructuring his foundation's parameters would sound bizarre at best, stalkerish at worst. "Your textbook in the park," he said instead, "teaching certification notes, and you mentioned working while caring for your daughter." The rest was an educated guess. Melody studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Harrington." "Thomas, please." "Thomas," she conceded, "while I appreciate you thinking of me, I'm not looking for a handout. I've always managed on my own." "It's not a handout," Thomas insisted. "It's an investment in you and your daughter's future. The foundation identifies people with potential and removes obstacles to their success." Something in Melody's expression shifted. "Why me? There are thousands of single parents in this city struggling worse than I am." The question caught Thomas off guard. Why her? What was it about this particular woman that had cut through his carefully constructed defenses? "Your voice," he said finally, the truth slipping out before he could filter it. "When you were singing to your daughter in the park, it reminded me of my mother. She raised me alone, worked multiple jobs, and still made time to sing to me every night. She died before she could see me succeed, before I could make things easier for her." The raw honesty in his voice surprised them both. Thomas rarely spoke about his mother, even to people who had known him for years. Melody's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your mother. The point is," Thomas continued, regaining his composure, "the foundation can help with your housing situation. Immediately." Melody froze. "How do you know about my housing situation?" Thomas realized his mistake too late. Yesterday at the cafe, I saw you drop an eviction notice." "So you've been watching me," Melody said, taking a step back, "following me, reading my private documents, and now you show up offering mysterious help through your foundation." She made air quotes around the word. "Do you have any idea how predatory that sounds?" "That's not my intention at all," Thomas protested, but he could see how his actions might appear from her perspective. "I need to go get my daughter," Melody said firmly, already turning away. "Wait," Thomas called. "At least take my card. Look up the foundation, it's legitimate." Melody hesitated, then took the card he was holding out. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrington." Thomas watched her walk away, berating himself for his clumsy approach. He'd handled billion-dollar negotiations with ease, yet somehow managed to completely mishandle a simple offer of assistance. That evening, Melody sat at her tiny kitchen table after putting Zoe to bed, Thomas's business card in front of her. Despite her suspicions, curiosity won out. She opened her laptop, a refurbished model that frequently froze, and searched for information about the Harrington Foundation. To her surprise, it existed and appeared legitimate, though fairly new. Its stated mission aligned with what Thomas had told her, identifying and supporting individuals with potential who faced significant barriers. There were impressive board members, clear guidelines, and transparent financials. What she couldn't find was any application process or information about how recipients were selected. As she continued researching, a notification popped up on her screen, another email from her landlord, reminding her of the impending eviction. Panic rose in her chest. Tomorrow was her last day to come up with the money, and she was still thousands short. The next morning brought no miracles. Melody dropped Zoe at Mrs. Rodriguez's with a heavy heart, knowing she might not have a home to return to by evening. Her final paycheck from the coffee corner covered less than a quarter of what she owed. As she walked to work, Thomas's offer kept replaying in her mind. Was her pride worth Zoe's stability? When she arrived at the cafe, Jack was waiting with an unexpected announcement. "I can't believe I'm saying this," he began, "but someone purchased the coffee corner yesterday afternoon. The new owner is coming in today to meet the staff." Melody's stomach dropped. "Are we losing our jobs?" "Don't know yet," Jack admitted, "but I've never seen a buyout where the staff stayed intact." The news couldn't have come at a worse time. Melody moved through her morning shift in a daze, serving customers on autopilot while her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. By noon, the staff was buzzing with speculation about the new owner. "I heard it's some corporate chain," one barista whispered. "They'll probably turn us into another soulless franchise." At precisely 1 o'clock, Jack gathered everyone behind the counter. "Folks, I'd like you to meet the new owner of the coffee corner." Melody looked up from the espresso machine she'd been cleaning and froze. Thomas Harrington stood before them, looking slightly uncomfortable in the humble surroundings of the cafe. "Good afternoon," he greeted them. "I'm Thomas Harrington. As of yesterday, I've acquired ownership of this establishment. I want to assure you all that your jobs are secure. In fact, I'll be expanding operations and increasing wages across the board by 15%, effective immediately." Stunned murmurs rippled through the staff. Melody felt the room tilting slightly. This couldn't be happening. "Additionally," Thomas continued, "I'll be implementing a comprehensive benefits package including health insurance and childcare assistance for employees with children." His eyes briefly met Melody's before moving on. "Mr. Reynolds has kindly agreed to stay on as manager, and I'll be taking a hands-off approach to daily operations." After the announcement, as the excited staff returned to work, Melody cornered Thomas by the office door. "What are you doing?" she demanded, keeping her voice low. "Investing in a promising local business," Thomas replied evenly. "Did you buy this place because of me?" The question was direct, her eyes searching his face for the truth. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I bought it because it's a sound business decision. The location is excellent, the product is good, and with some capital improvements, it has significant growth potential." "You expect me to believe that's a coincidence?" "No," Thomas admitted after a pause. "I noticed the cafe because of you, but my offer stands separate from my business decisions. The foundation can help with your housing situation, no strings attached. Whether you work here or elsewhere doesn't change that." Before Melody could respond, Jack approached with payroll questions for Thomas. "We'll continue this conversation later," Thomas told her quietly, before turning to Jack. That afternoon, Melody received an envelope with her paycheck. Inside, she found not only her wages, but a letter offering her a promotion to assistant manager with a salary that made her breath catch. It was nearly triple what she currently earned. As she stared at the figures, the reality of her situation hit her with full force. This stranger had purchased an entire business, created a foundation program, and engineered a solution to her problems, all within 48 hours of meeting her. The scale of his intervention was both overwhelming and frightening. What Melody didn't know as she stood there, letter in hand, was that Thomas's interest in her went far beyond charity or guilt. The song she'd sung to her daughter had awakened something he'd thought long dead, a connection to his own humanity, his own past. And what Thomas couldn't have anticipated was that his well-intentioned actions might push her further away rather than draw her closer. As closing time approached, Melody made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives, a choice between pride and pragmatism, between independence and accepting help that came with invisible strings. What she didn't realize was that her decision would trigger the revelation of Thomas's deepest secret, one that would redefine everything about their unusual connection. Melody stood outside her apartment building, Zoe bundled against her chest in a baby carrier. The eviction notice in her hand was no longer just a threat, but a reality. Her landlord had been clear: payment in full by 5 o'clock, or the locks would be changed. It was now 4:30 p.m. The promotion letter from Thomas burned in her pocket like a hot coal. The salary would secure their future, but accepting it felt like surrendering her independence. Throughout her life, Melody had depended only on herself. After her parents' death, after her fiancé's abandonment, she had sworn never to rely on anyone else. Yet here she was, facing impossible choices with her daughter's well-being hanging in the balance. Her phone vibrated with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Any news? You and Zoe can stay with me tonight if needed." The kindness of her elderly neighbor brought tears to Melody's eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez lived in a one-bedroom apartment, even smaller than Melody's, surviving on a modest pension. The offer was generous but unsustainable, and unfair to both the older woman and Zoe. As she wavered on the sidewalk, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened and Thomas stepped out, his tall frame unfolding elegantly from the vehicle. "I hoped I'd find you here," he said, approaching cautiously. "Jack mentioned you left work early." Melody instinctively held Zoe tighter. "Why are you following me?" "I'm not," Thomas insisted, maintaining a respectful distance. "I came to apologize. My approach has been heavy-handed." "That's an understatement," Melody said. But without the anger she'd felt earlier, exhaustion had dulled her edges. Thomas glanced at the eviction notice in her hand. "May I ask what you've decided? About your job offer, or about being one of your charity cases?" "Neither," Thomas said quietly. "About where you and Zoe will sleep tonight." The simple question, so direct, so immediate, broke through Melody's remaining defenses. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. Zoe, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss. "I don't know," Melody admitted, gently bouncing to soothe her daughter. "I've tried everything, called everyone. I'm still thousands short, and it's almost 5. Thomas took a careful step closer. "I understand pride, Melody. I grew up with a mother who would work 3 jobs rather than accept help. Her stubbornness killed her. A heart attack at 42 because she wouldn't take time off to see a doctor about chest pains. I was 19. Melody looked up, surprised by this personal revelation. "I've spent 20 years building walls between myself and the world," Thomas continued, "convincing myself that success would fill the emptiness she left behind. It hasn't." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "When I heard you singing to Zoe in the park, something broke open. I remembered what it felt like to be loved that completely, to matter to someone beyond what I could provide or achieve." "So I'm what? Your redemption project?" Melody asked, but the bite had gone out of her words. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're a remarkable woman facing temporary circumstances beyond your control. The foundation offers a hand up, not a handout. And the promotion? That's because Jack has been telling me for 2 days that you're the hardest worker he's ever managed and the only one with the skills to help expand the business." Zoe chose that moment to reach out a tiny hand toward Thomas, her previous fussing forgotten. The gesture seemed to surprise them both. "She's a good judge of character," Melody said softly, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "Smart kid," Thomas replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners, like her mother. A silence fell between them, less tense than before. In the distance, a church bell chimed 5:15. "I can't repay you," Melody finally said. "Not immediately." "That's not how this works," Thomas explained. "The foundation provides an interest-free loan for your back rent. You repay it in manageable installments once you're stable. The promotion is entirely separate. You've earned it on merit, according to Jack. Your financial situation would have improved either way. This just accelerates the timeline." Melody studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She found none, only an earnestness that seemed at odds with his powerful businessman persona. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her since his unexpected appearance at the cafe. Thomas looked momentarily taken aback, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because 20 years ago no one was there for my mother when she needed help. Because the system is designed to keep people like you, smart, hard-working, capable people, trapped in impossible circumstances. Because..." He hesitated, then finished simply, Because your voice reminded me that I still have a heart. The church bells chimed 5 o'clock. Time had run out. Okay, Melody said, making her decision. I accept the foundation's help. And the promotion. Relief washed over Thomas's features. I'll call my lawyer right now. He can wire the funds to your landlord immediately. As Thomas made the call, Melody felt a strange mixture of emotions. Gratitude, trepidation, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had accepted help, something her pride had never before allowed. But she hadn't surrendered her independence. The distinction felt important. Within 20 minutes, Thomas's lawyer had arranged everything. The landlord, appeased by the payment and the sizable late fee Thomas had added, agreed to tear up the eviction notice. Melody and Zoe could return to their apartment. Thank you, Melody said simply, as they stood outside her building, the crisis averted. Not just for the money, but for respecting my dignity in the process. Thomas nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. The foundation will send over the official paperwork tomorrow. Take time to read it carefully. If you have questions, call me directly. He handed her another business card, this one with his personal number handwritten on the back. As he turned to leave, Melody made an impulsive decision. Would you like to come up for coffee? Not the fancy kind we serve at work, just regular home brew. Thomas looked surprised but pleased. I'd like that very much. Melody's apartment was small but meticulously clean. Every inch of space was thoughtfully utilized, from the fold-away dining table to the clever storage solutions that kept Zoe's toys organized. Thomas noticed that despite the obvious financial constraints, the home felt warm and inviting. Children's books lined a small shelf, colorful artwork adorned the walls, and family photos, mostly of Melody and Zoe, sat in simple frames. It's not much, Melody said, watching him take in her modest living space. It's a home, Thomas replied with genuine appreciation. My penthouse has 5 times the square footage and half the soul. While Melody prepared coffee and settled Zoe in her playpen, Thomas found himself drawn to a framed photo on the bookshelf. It showed a younger Melody with an older couple, her parents, he presumed. They were standing on a beach, arms around each other, laughing into the camera. Is this your family? He asked when she returned with 2 mugs. Melody nodded, her expression softening. My parents. That was taken in Florida 2 months before the accident. They were high school sweethearts, married for 30 years. They look happy, Thomas observed. They were, Melody confirmed, sitting on the small sofa and gesturing for Thomas to join her. They taught me what real love looks like, how it should feel. She smiled sadly. I thought I'd found that with Zoe's father, but he left. Thomas finished for her, connecting the pieces. When I told him I was pregnant, said he wasn't father material. She shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't hide the old pain. Turns out he did me a favor. Zoe deserves better. Thomas nodded, understanding all too well. My father walked out when I was 5. Never heard from him again. That seems to be our common thread, Melody observed, sipping her coffee. Single parents, absent fathers. My mother used to say that some people aren't meant to be parents, Thomas recalled. That raising a child requires a capacity for selflessness that not everyone possesses. Your mother sounds wise. She was, Thomas agreed, a wistful smile crossing his features. She would have liked you. The conversation flowed more easily than either had expected. As evening descended, they discovered numerous unexpected connections, a shared love of classic novels, similar taste in music, the same favorite ice cream flavor. Thomas helped Melody bathe and put Zoe to bed, displaying a natural ease with the baby that surprised them both. You're good with her, Melody remarked, as they watched Zoe drift off to sleep in her crib. I've never spent much time around children, Thomas admitted, but she makes it easy. Later, as Thomas prepared to leave, a comfortable warmth had settled between them. Not quite friendship yet, but the foundation for something genuine. Thank you for the coffee, he said at the door. And for trusting me enough to accept help. Thank you for offering it in a way I could accept, Melody replied. Will I see you at the cafe tomorrow? Actually, I'll be in Tokyo for the next week. Business trip that can't be postponed, but I'd like to check in when I return, if that's all right. I'd like that, Melody said, surprising herself with her sincerity. After Thomas left, Melody leaned against the closed door, trying to process the whirlwind of the past few days. Her life had changed dramatically, from the brink of homelessness to financial stability in less than 48 hours. Yet the most significant change wasn't her bank account balance or job title, but the crack in the wall she'd built around her heart since Zoe's father had walked out. The following week brought more changes. The foundation paperwork arrived as promised, straightforward, fair, and without hidden clauses. Melody's promotion began immediately, bringing new responsibilities that challenged and engaged her. The childcare assistance program Thomas had implemented meant Zoe could attend a quality daycare center near the cafe, allowing Melody to work her shifts without worry. When Thomas returned from Tokyo, he brought a small wooden puzzle for Zoe and a first-edition copy of Melody's favorite novel. The gifts were thoughtful rather than extravagant, evidence that he had listened and understood what would matter to them both. Over the next few months, a tentative friendship blossomed. Thomas joined them for weekend outings to the park, museum visits, and simple dinners at Melody's apartment. He never pushed for more, respecting her independence and the boundaries she set. In return, Melody invited him into the warm, messy reality of her life with Zoe, a world far removed from boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. As autumn gave way to winter, Thomas found himself spending more evenings at Melody's tiny apartment than his luxurious penthouse. The coffee corner thrived under their combined vision, Melody's practical experience paired with Thomas's business acumen. Together they expanded to a second location, then a third, creating a small but successful chain known for its quality products and exceptional employee benefits. One snowy evening in December, 3 months after their first meeting in the park, Thomas arrived at Melody's apartment with takeout containers and a nervous energy she hadn't seen before. "Everything okay?" she asked as they set the table. "There's something I need to tell you," Thomas said, his usual confidence wavering. "Something I should have shared sooner." Melody felt a knot form in her stomach. In her experience, such declarations rarely led anywhere good. "The day we met in the park," Thomas began, "when you were singing to Zoe, I didn't just listen. I cried." "You cried?" Melody repeated, surprised by this admission. Thomas nodded, looking almost embarrassed. "It was the first time I'd cried since my mother's funeral, 20 years of nothing, and then suddenly, hearing your voice." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "It broke something open inside me, a wall I'd built so high I'd forgotten what was behind it." "Why are you telling me this now?" Melody asked softly. "Because I need you to understand that before I met you and Zoe, I was just going through the motions of living. Success, money, power, none of it meant anything. I was hollow." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and sincere. "You didn't just remind me that I have a heart, Melody. You taught me how to use it again." The raw honesty of his confession touched something deep within her. For months she'd been fighting her growing feelings for Thomas, telling herself it was gratitude rather than affection, that he couldn't possibly see her, a struggling single mother, as anything more than a charity case or an employee. "I'm not sharing this with any expectations," Thomas continued when she remained silent. "I just wanted you to know the truth. That meeting you wasn't random or coincidental. It was," he searched for the word, "transformative." Melody looked across the table at this complex man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. The powerful CEO whose business decisions affected thousands, who had initially seemed so distant and intimidating, yet who now sat in her tiny kitchen helping Zoe with her sippy cup as naturally as if he'd been doing it forever. "I was singing my grandmother's lullaby that day," Melody said finally, "the one thing I had left of her. I sing it to Zoe every night, trying to build the same sense of security my grandmother gave me." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm glad it reached you too." Thomas's fingers tightened around hers. "I've been alone for a very long time, Melody, building empires instead of connections. I don't want to live that way anymore." "What do you want?" she asked, her heart racing. "To be part of something real," he said simply. "With you, with Zoe, if you'll have me." The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Melody thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance encounter in a park to a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine caring. There were 1,000 reasons to be cautious, to protect herself from potential heartbreak. But there was one overwhelming reason to take the risk. "We would," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "But not because you rescued us, not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are when you're sitting here at this table, making silly faces at my daughter, because that's the man we've come to care about." Relief and joy washed over Thomas's face. He stood, pulling Melody gently to her feet and into his arms. "That's the only man I want to be," he whispered against her hair. Later that evening, as snow fell softly outside the window, Melody sang Zoe to sleep while Thomas listened from the doorway. The lullaby that had first connected them filled the small room with its simple, timeless melody. As the final notes faded, Thomas stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Melody from behind, both of them watching the sleeping child. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For singing in the park that day, for letting me hear you." Melody turned in his embrace, facing him fully. "Thank you for listening." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the home they were beginning to build together, both understood the true nature of their unlikely connection. It wasn't about rescue or redemption, charity or chance. It was about recognition. Two souls who had experienced profound loss finding in each other the courage to trust again, to love again. And as Thomas leaned down to kiss her for the first time, gently, reverently, Melody knew that the song that had begun in the park that autumn day would continue, growing richer and more complex with each passing season. A melody of second chances and new beginnings, sung not in solitude but in harmony.